Well, good morning, and welcome to the home of Unitarian Universalism in Central Washington. I am Steve Clem. I am the celebrant today, and today's speaker is Knecht. There's a little bit of confusion on your bulletin this morning, but I've decided I will not be giving the sermon today. Okay. If you are a visitor this morning, we are so glad you're here. We welcome every person of goodwill just as you are. Whomever you love, whatever body you inhabit, whatever your age, you are welcome here. And we invite you to join us for a social hour after the service, both in person and on Zoom. Now, for the folks on Zoom, you can find our order of service in the chat, and I would ask everyone here in the sanctuary now and on Zoom to please take a moment and greet your neighbor. So nice to be able to do this again with you. That's always fun, man.
Good to see you here on Zoom.
Half the audience. It's good. I've got a slide deck. Everything just follows in the slide deck. Darius is happy.
Hard to talk over everybody.
It's fun to watch. I like it.
It's so good to be here in all the ways that we gather. We do have announcements this week, and our announcements are from our Board of Trustees President, Julie McAllister.
Thank you. So good morning. As my lovely husband just said, I'm Julie McAllister, and I am the current board president. Two quick announcements. The first is that today after the service, behind you may have noticed tables. So those are for the committee fair, or as people have been calling it, the Get Involved Fair. If nothing else, it's a chance to put a face to people who are involved in each of the committees. So please, even if you don't think you want to get more involved, please go back and talk to people so that they're not lonely back there. Grab your coffee, grab a treat, and go on back. We have 14 opportunities back there for you. Secondly, the annual congregational meeting is next Sunday after the service. My plan, if you know me well, you know my plans aren't always perfect. My plan is that we will start by noon. Oh, thank you, honey. It's open to all members, friends. Only members by our bylaws can vote. We will set up a table in the back for members to sign in and get their voting stick. Voting will also be available by Zoom. Thank you, Vern Smith, for saying he will run the worship tech piece and be the Zoom host. The packet has gone out to everyone. It was in the Friday email yesterday, the CUUF weekend notes, there's a link. And if you were watching the announcement, you saw it's also on the special events on the website. It's about 52 pages, so we did not mail it to everyone because it's where you find all the committee reports, the Board of Trustees nominees, etc. We will be voting on 3 things: slate of nominees for the board, nominating committee representative, the proposed budget for the next fiscal year, and we have to approve the minutes from last year. Also in the packet is a form for the share the plate. We're going back to what our bylaws say, which is that we vote on and we choose the share the plate recipients for the next year. So we're voting for 10, there are more than 10 listed. And that will be an actual piece of paper vote. We will have extra copies of that here next Sunday so people can vote and turn it in, and we'll be able to compile it. That's it. Thank you. We'll see you after the service. If you are going to join by Zoom, because I assume there's people on Zoom right now, we ask that the Zoom attendees log in by 11:45. My plan is to start the meeting at noon. So log in by 11:45, because even if you're on Zoom, we still have to get you checked in as a member, just like we would here in the sanctuary. All right, thank you.
Didn't she do a great job? We gather here on the homeland of the Pasquosa, where they have lived for generations upon generations as stewards of the land. They continue to live here. They continue tribal traditions at all levels of culture through mutually held customs and beliefs of tribal philosophy, folklore, religious activity, and even political structure. The Pasquosa continually work to retain the knowledge necessary for their traditional life and to maintain a close attachment to and an interrelationship with these ancestral lands and the earth. The songs sung by their ancestors in mat lodges on the banks of the Wenatchee River are still sung at winter dances. Songs and prayers accompany the first roots feast, the first salmon feast, the first berry feast. And their children are still taught stories about coyote, kingfisher, and mole. Hunting, fishing, and gathering practices are being passed on through generations. They are digging camas and bitter roots in the spring. They are hunting for deer and gathering huckleberries in the late summer and early fall. They are annually cleaning, decorating, and honoring the graves of their elders. And we support the Indigenous people in many ways, and we ask that you go to our justice page on the CUUF website, where you will find links to information about Indigenous rights and reparations and to Indigenous advocacy groups. Our opening words today are from Reverend Matthew Johnson. For 5,000 years or more than 15,000 generations, human beings have been invoking spiritual power. My ancestors and your ancestors have gathered together to make sense of our lives and their place in the cosmos. And we gather this morning to make sense of ourselves and this universe in which we live as best as we are able. And we call ourselves to worship together, and we invoke the power and wonder of life itself. It's a power we sometimes forget. We forget that we are part of the whole of creation. We forget that we are stardust. We forget that we are capable of miracles, and first among them, the miracle of love. So we lift our eyes and we open our ears to the true and to the beautiful. And for 5,000 years or more, we have done this. Today's sermon is, Are We Born Sinners? And Ben Knecht will delve into the concept of original sin, a topic that has been interpreted and understood in myriad ways throughout history. During this journey, let us hold the encouragement of spiritual growth in our hearts. We will hear of ancient texts, we will hear of divine interventions, and of an awe-inspiring cosmic event that is just not a scientific theory, but a testament to the majesty of nature. We will travel from a divine story to a narrative grounded in empirical evidence and scientific understanding that offers a different perspective on our origins. May we find wisdom and inspiration this morning that will enrich our lives with purpose, compassion, and humility. Come, let us worship together. And as we kindle a sacred flame within a chalice, this is our symbol of being Unitarian Universalists. And we join them all over the world in lighting chalices this morning. And if you are joining by Zoom video, please light your own chalice as well. And repeat after me. In the light of truth and the warmth of love, we gather to seek and seek to share.
Here are today's wisdom readings. Our first reading is from a longtime historic Jesus writer, loved by all those who are wondering about how to rethink their Christianity for the modern age. Marcus J. Borg. Given the richness of meaning that a historical, metaphysical reading of Genesis reveals, the creation stories strike me as profoundly true. Critical thinking leads to an understanding of why the details of Genesis are as they are, and also makes clear that their truth is not to be understood in literal, factual terms. Rather, their truth is expressed in the non-conceptual language of myth and metaphor, and no particular reading can exhaust their meanings. The next reading is from our own transition minister, Reverend Elizabeth Soley. This is taken verbatim from her script on her sermon about religious naturalism in November 2021. I grew up in Unitarian Universalism when I was a staunchly humanist faith. And while I agree with all the tenets of humanism, I never felt comfortable with the label. Partly because many of the most vocal humanists I knew were strident, angry white men of a certain age, and there didn't seem to be room for me. But mostly because it felt too human-centered. I felt too small. In other words, any system with God, no matter how broadly defined, felt too Abrahamic, too masculine, too located at some distance out there. What's a girl to do? In seminary, I encountered an articulation of my felt theology and learned it is called religious naturalism. I immediately felt at home. It wasn't so much a new idea as vocabulary for what I had always known.
So if we can form our arches, let us sing our person back to each other to find me. It's only stardust. I was going to have some glitter and go, but I figured that the people that clean the floor here would not appreciate that.
So we're supposed to talk about original sin. So reached in the way back of my closet and got out my old dark suit. So I have a right costume on today. I hope you understand. I was going to wear a tie, but said that's overdoing it. A few Sundays ago, Reverend Birchlick preached on how we're all loved and how we are lovable. As I reflected on that message, I noted to a congregant during the UU communion time that it appears like Reverend Tom doesn't believe in original sin. I got back this puzzled look and a reply, well, you think so? So unfortunately, I didn't explore this comment any further, but it got me to pondering. Did the congregant not know what original sin was, or maybe something else? This got me to thinking about original sin and trying to understand this Christian concept or a theologic concept. For many, original sin is what they grew up with, and it guides their thinking and understanding of who they and others are, and that thinking how they look and treat others, and in particular how men treat women. Today I want to give you a historical and theologic introduction to original sin as it occurs in the biblical book of Genesis and its effect on society's views, behavior, and culture. I'll conclude with an alternative philosophy called religious naturalism. This is a refinement of humanism that resonates with me. Original sin occurred in the very beginning of our Earth's formation story with the introduction of the first 3 chapters of Genesis. Genesis is the first book we call the Old Testament. Genesis was written by several authors and wasn't written down until probably the Israelites escaped from their exile in Babylon in 539 BCE. The Jewish faith believes that it was written by Moses around 1400 BCE. Genesis is the product of its time, reflects the concerns and beliefs of this ancient tribe. There are 2 creation stories in Genesis written about 400 years apart. We're going to concentrate on the second, chapters 2 and 3 of Genesis. Now, I want to give you a quick summary of the Genesis creation story, original sin, and the stain that it leaves on us. God created the earth, he added the plants and animals, and lastly, humans, male and female. First Adam, and then from his own rib, a suitable helper, the female Eve. He placed them in a garden called Eden. Eve was tempted by a serpent to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, even though God had forbidden them not to. Eve then gave some to Adam, who also eats it. They immediately recognize their nakedness and feel shame, and then God discovers their disobedience and punishes them. He curses the serpent to crawl on his belly forever. Eve is sentenced to pain and childbirth, and yet will still have desire for her husband, who will rule over her. Adam, since he listened to Eve, by eating the fruit, will have to work and toil in the dirt to grow the plants of the field and sweat for his food all the days of his life. Then he'll return in death to the dirt from which he came. Finally, they're banished from this easy living in the Garden of Eden, and they became mortal. Evangelical Christians intuitively understand that this biblical creation story communicates cultural, social, and religious values and presents them as if they were universally valid. Many of the creation story ideas have infused our social mores no matter what our beliefs are. This traditional understanding of original sin in Christian theology only occurred after St. Augustine's extensive writings and teachings in the early 400s AD. He shaped the understanding of biblical meaning and helped lay the foundation for much of medieval and modern Christian thinking. Now I'm going to give you a long footnote regarding some of this early Christian history and why anyone listened to St. Augustine. I don't want you to be drifting off. Augustine is a big deal in Jewish thinking. Christianity had been made the Roman Empire's official religion in 313 AD by Emperor Constantine. The Jewish one God concept of a redeeming Messiah, Jesus, replaced the prior multiple gods worshipped by its citizens. Christianity's leaders were trying to get a coherent message or theology together about how did Jesus and God relate to each other. And that led to some of the first drafts of the Trinity. They were arguing intensely about what collection of books they should put in the Bible, which wasn't settled until 393 AD. These leaders wanted everyone to understand why Christianity was the only true religion. Augustine was a very vocal and prolific writer. He strongly urged that human guilt, moral depravity, is inherited by all humanity through Adam's sperm because of Adam and Eve's disobedience. Their sin corrupted and stained the whole of nature itself. Sexual desire is seen as sinful. Infants are infected from the moment of conception with the disease and stain of original sin. Women are temptresses and need to be controlled. Humans were separated from God. Jesus is not infected with sin because he was divinely created. Because of this disobedience, we are all inclined towards selfishness, rebellion, moral wrongdoing, pride, greed, cruelty, but we can be redeemed and have salvation by believing in Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who was sent by God to die a sacrificial death on the cross and be resurrected. Baptism also helps erase original sin. St. Augustine was so convinced of this notion that he became a celibate monk, even though he had a son with a woman he lived with, and he was scheduled to marry a wealthy heiress. That's the end of the footnote. I hope it helps you understand some of this Christian theologic history. Even the Reformation did not save us from original sin. Protestant reformers like Martin Luther and John Calvin, they persisted with the Roman Catholic Church's understanding or concept of original sin. Now I want to relate some ideas of how our society has embraced the positive concepts found in the Genesis creation story before St. Augustine's very negative interpretations were accepted. Genesis had been read and studied for over 700 years before St. Augustine's thinking influenced Christian theology. Judaism rejects the idea of original sin and believes that humans enter the world pure as they were created by God, with the ability to choose either good or evil via their free will, because God does not control their thinking. Genesis accounts of creation introduced into our Western world the intrinsic worth of every human being made in God's image. Early Christians thought that this conviction of human worth in moral terms, it's seen later in political terms. For example, our Declaration of Independence invoked, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. The idea of human moral equality flourished among the converts to Christianity in the early days, which were mostly slaves. Many were slaves and women. These marginalized people were anything but equal under society, Roman law and society. Jesus also addressed the plight of divorced women. According to the New Testament accounts, he only mentioned the story of Adam and Eve once. He used Genesis to make a moral point to the Pharisees on divorce. Jesus said, "That which God has joined together, let no one put asunder." He prohibited divorce altogether. For Jews, procreation was the purpose of marriage, and divorce was a male prerogative. So if a Jewish wife had only female children, a defective child was barren, or whatever, she could be dumped. Poor, divorced women were not well thought of and had no place to go unless their husband would take, or their father would take them back. Jesus emphasized husbands' responsibility toward their wives. Now to sex and original sin. Jews do not understand original sin had anything to do with sex, nor did early Jesus followers. They thought procreation was cooperation with God in the creation. Jesus' teaching emphasized our individual responsibility to each other, not to a state or to a king. Jesus related in Matthew, "What profit is it for a man if he gains the whole world but loses his own soul?" He and his followers belong to the marginalized outsiders in a society commercially controlled and exploited by the Roman governing powers. His empire of God and the idea that the value of the individual was intrinsic, a God-given value of infinite worth, apart from any social, family, or governmental connections. Now, how does this Unitarian Universalist deal with Genesis and its ancient story about this creation of the world and the humans? As you can imagine, the concept of original sin does not resonate with my understanding of my fellow humans and the earth we're on. Here's my approach, and you can borrow from it, and I need to take off a little bit of this black stuff. I became a Unitarian in 1962 when I began to think about how unnatural the Christian story and later Old Testament stories were. I'm a product of the 17th century Reformation, when science began to explain and continues to explain the world. The myths and story of the Bible I had lived with while I was young became only stories of a unique tribe and a new religion that grew out of the Jewish religion 2,000 years ago. I could no longer hold truths that old any more than my professors would teach me to be a doctor from medical books 2,000 years old. I became, like many Unitarians in the 60s, a humanist. Later, I became a religious naturalist. Simply put, humanism thinks that humans are capable of being ethical and moral without religion or belief in a deity. If you're a regular attender of CUUF, religious naturalism is not new concept, as you heard from my reading. Elizabeth solely introduced our congregation to this form in the past. The creation story of religious naturalism is my current Genesis story about what we are. The Big Bang for creation of Earth and the universe, and the concept of Darwin's evolution to explain how all life forms grew on Earth. I think this modern creation story is far more exciting and mind-stretching than the book of Genesis. The simplest definition of religious naturalism is a negation, a statement about what it's not. It's the notion that there is no supernatural, there is only natural. Nothing exists outside natural universe. When you have an understanding about the epic of cosmic evolution, how all Earth came from so-called stardust, we are provided with a vision of the universe in a single reality, entity, or some say singularity. From this stardust, we Earthlings evolved from those first cells that got together in the oceans of our Earth. We are all in cellular relationship with other living organisms Like no other story, this concept teaches us that we're all members of one family, sharing the same genetic code and similar history. Genesis 2:7 says that God formed us from dust, breathed into our nostrils for life so that we could till and dominate the earth. Genesis 1:26 has God creating man and woman to be fruitful and have domination over every living thing on earth. No, not this very ancient creation story. An early 20th century British biologist, Julia Huxley, puts it, "We are the universe becoming conscious of itself." We are the universe becoming conscious of itself. I think Christianity's creation story replaced the belief that the sacred is in rivers and streams and trees with the doctrine that God is a dismembered spirit whose true residence is in heaven. The Genesis story asserts humanity's domination over nature and establishes why we humans can cut, dig, and drill forever. The Genesis story separates human creation from the rest of creation and makes it inferior to we humans. The Genesis story of creation empties the biosphere of any sense of interdependent relationship between us and it. The Genesis story makes it possible to exploit nature in a mood of indifference to the feelings of natural subjects. Religious naturalism has a religious story about our beginnings and a sense of wonder and reverence toward nature. Religious naturalism has made our seventh principle come alive, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. We're fully linked with our surroundings in time, space, matter, and causality. The metaphor of the web is used to describe this interrelationship. We create the web creates us. Within this relational web, we are also self-creative and therefore can transform the web, for better or worse. We truly do exist in a web, a network, a maze of interdependence. Now, I want you all to please raise in body and spirit to sing 205, Amazing Grace. Now remember, these verses were written by John Newton. He wrote these in 1773. He was a captain of a slave ship that brought slaves from Western Africa to the slave trading cities of America. In a sense, America's first original sin. So as you sing those verses, think of this captain who in 1773 wrote these down when he converted to Christianity.
We are blessed by your generosity. May your gifts make a difference in our communities through the ministries of this church.
There be, then, to be a species endowed with the capacity to perceive, comprehend, and align itself with the very forces that have governed our universe for more than 13 billion years. So join us in our traditional chalice extinguishing words. We extinguish this challenge at the flight frame of our community or the fire of commitment. These we hold in our hearts until we are together again. So let's join hands, and if you don't want to do that, cross your arms, and we'll close with the coffee hour.
still